One night, multiple murders, a missing body. Let's talk about how, despite DNA evidence, the 1981 Keddie Murders remain unsolved to this day. Hi, this is 10-Minute Murder. If you're looking for brief and bingeable true crime, you are in the right place. I'm Joe, the host, and welcome. I'm happy that you're here today. If you're new to listening to 10-Minute Murder, I'm excited that you decided to give it a try, and I hope that what you hear is not what you expect, but like in a good way. I don't try to do what others are doing. I do what I do. If you want to hear the other stuff, you wouldn't be here listening to this stuff, right? I think that came out right. If not, let's pretend like I said something coherent. Hey, I've had one of those days where you're looking around the room for an adult to handle all the situations that are going on, and then you realize that you are the adult. So that's been my day today. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder. It's brief and bingeable true crime, as I mentioned. And before we get going with your story today, this is your reminder to subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. When you become a subscriber to 10-Minute Murder, first of all, it's free, so you're not paying anything, and you are able to find the show and never miss any future episodes. It automatically comes to you. You don't have to go searching for it. Also, connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. If you have friends that like true crime podcasts, please let them know about this one. And if you're looking for links, you can find them in the show notes of this episode, as well as at 10minutemurder.com. Now, to today's story. There's something about unsolved murders that capture your imagination, the imagination of your typical true crime fans. Sometimes we don't like them because there's no closure, but at the same time, that little bit of mystery makes it more interesting. It seems impossible. How can a killer savagely murder their victim and then simply vanish? When it comes to the Keddie murders, this question seems even more absurd. How can a killer murder 4 people, 3 family members and a visiting friend, without getting caught? And why would they leave the 3 bodies in the house to be discovered, but then take the last victim with them? The Keddie murders, named after the small Californian railroad town where the killings took place, happened on April 11, 1981, with neighbors waking up to the sound of muffled screams that night. 3 members of a household were brutally murdered, and then a 4th vanished without a trace. Let's take a look at who was inside that house. But as a side note, I'm about to throw out a lot of names at you in a short amount of time, so heads up. 36-year-old Glenna Susan Sharp, known to her friends and family as Sue, had just moved in with her family. She had 5 children, so the bigger house was a relief compared to the trailer home that they'd previously rented. Sue was at home on that night, along with 4 of her children. The eldest, 15-year-old John, 12-year-old Tina, 10-year-old Rick, and the baby of the family, Greg, who was 5 years old. And by the way, doesn't Greg sound like a weird name for a baby in 2023? I can't imagine someone saying, "Hey, this is my baby, Greg." Anyway, Rick and Greg's friend, Justin Smart, and John's friend, Dana Hall Wingate, were also staying over at the house. One of the Sharp children was absent, 14-year-old Sheila. She had decided to spend the night sleeping over at their neighbor's house, the Seabolts. It was the first time that Sheila had ever slept over at the Seabolts, and it meant that she survived, but it also meant that she was the one who discovered the bodies the next morning. It was 7 a.m. on April 12th when Sheila returned home, but as soon as she stepped a foot inside, she was greeted by an absolutely unnerving sight. Blood covered the living room, and the bodies of her mother, her older brother John, and his friend Dana. They were tied up with electrical cords. Their hands were bound tightly with tape. It seemed as if the killer had not just wanted them dead, but he had wanted the victims to suffer. The murder weapons included a hammer, 2 knives, including a steak knife that had been used so aggressively that the blade was bent. Sheila ran back to the neighbor's house and returned with Jamie Seabolt, who saw something incredible. The 3 boys, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were all still alive. He quickly helped them out of the window of one of the bedrooms, and he couldn't believe that they seemed to be completely unharmed. But with the 3 bodies in the living room and the 3 boys in the bedroom, it was quickly clear that one person was unaccounted for. 12-year-old Tina was missing. The autopsy reports were grim. Susan had been found naked from the waist down, gagged with her own underwear, and she had been stabbed in her chest and throat. John's throat had been cut, while Dana had been beaten and strangled. There was no pattern to the killings that investigators could identify. It seemed random, brutal, and uncontrolled. This contrasted with the state of the house that the bodies were found in. No forced entry, and the telephone cord neatly and cleanly cut. There were 4 things missing from the house: a toolbox, Tina's jacket, a pair of Tina's shoes, and Tina herself. It seemed to investigators like the answer must lie with one of the house's survivors, who had surely seen or heard something. At first, they believed that the boys had somehow slept through the attacks, but later, Justin Smart, the friend of the boys, confessed that he had witnessed the murders. And Justin's story was all over the place. At first, he said that he had dreamed about the murders, but under hypnosis, he was able to give investigators details of what he had supposedly seen that night. 2 men, one who had long hair and one with a mustache, arguing with Sue, John, and Dana. After the argument began, Tina walked in, and one of the men took her outside, abducting her. In more than 3/4 of child abductions, the victim is dead within the first 3 hours of their kidnapping. As hours turned into days, and finally years, hope that Tina would safely be returned had dwindled. 3 years had passed since the Keddie murders, when a bottle collector stumbled upon part of a human skull and jaw, more than 100 miles away from Keddie. Because they were found so far away, there was no reason for investigators to connect the remains to Tina, except for this. After the sheriff's office announced that the human remains had been found, they received a phone call from an anonymous caller telling them that they had found the skeleton of Tina Sharp. This suspicion was increased by something found near to the remains: Tina's missing blue jacket. Even though it wasn't the ending that anyone had hoped for, Tina Sharp could be finally put to rest. So, 3 years on, we've got around 4,000 man-hours invested into the case, several serial killers who were ruled out as the culprits, and composite sketches completed by a completely amateur sketch artist with no forensic experience, no specialist training, and limited artistic talent, based on Justin's descriptions. Motive after motive ruled out, and the list of potential suspects getting narrower and narrower over time. Where does that leave the investigation? More or less where it is today, unsolved. Throughout the investigation, there was one person who was eyed with suspicion: Justin Smart's father, Martin. Martin Smart was another neighbor of the Smart family. He had been overly helpful throughout the investigation, providing clue after clue with one thing in common. Each bit of random information served to make him look less suspicious, including his report that somebody had broken into his own home and randomly stolen a single claw hammer. Because how much does the stuff inside your house suck if a burglar breaks in and just says, "I guess I'll take this hammer and be on my way"? It doesn't make any sense. Martin's wife, Marilyn, shared the same views as investigators. Something wasn't right with Martin. In a theory that seemed to back up Justin Smart's reports of the killing being 2 men, Marilyn also suspected a friend of Martin's, John Boobity, who was known as Bo. Martin and Bo were each other's alibis for the night of the murders, when Marilyn had left the 2 friends drinking at a bar. Several hours later, Marilyn woke up to a strange, strong smell. When she investigated, she found that Martin and Bo had returned home, and they had lit up the wood stove. To this day, she doesn't know what they were burning. But more than anything else, Marilyn's main reason for suspecting her husband is simple. In her own words, he, quote, hated Johnny Sharp with a passion. A short time after the murders, Martin Smart drove to Nevada. In his time there, he sent a letter to his wife containing this damning line at the end, quote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." Despite this line essentially reading as a confession to the murders, investigators never took the letter into evidence in the investigation of the murders. That letter was not Martin's only confession. He booked himself in for regular counseling, where he confessed everything, telling his counselor that he had murdered Sue. He had been forced to kill Tina after she had seen him kill her mother, and he knew that she could identify him as the killer. However, he insisted to his counselor that he didn't have anything to do with the boys. How this lines up with Martin's supposed hatred of John Sharp is anyone's guess. But Martin was never convicted as the killer, and in 2000, he died of cancer, taking any of his further confessions to the grave. His suspected accomplice, Bo, had died more than a decade earlier. In 2004, along with whatever secrets lie within it, the house where the Keddie murders took place was demolished. The case, it seems, had gone cold until March of 2016. This time, the evidence uncovered wasn't grisly, but it was crucial. The same claw hammer that Martin Smart reported stolen was discovered at the bottom of a pond in the area. Could it have been accidentally lost and ended up in the pond somehow? The county sheriff thought otherwise, saying that because of the location where the hammer had been found, it was clear that it had not been lost. It had been discarded by someone who planned on it never being found again. Unlike many vintage cold cases, there seems to be a good chance that the case could be closed with new forensic techniques. In 2018, DNA taken from the medical tape used to restrain the 3 victims was analyzed, and the DNA is a match to a living suspect of the murders, although as of 2023, no arrests have been made.